talk to DBAs, and I always ask a question. I say, how many of you have mission-critical data in the cloud? Like data where if it went down, you'd be covered. So I'm going to ask you guys that question. How many of you have mission-critical data in the cloud? Zero, right? Okay. Interesting. Well, just Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Avenger, any of the major platforms, Rackspace, Force.com. Okay, so right now you guys say zero, right? Guess what? When I talk to your developers, when I go to like code camps and user groups and developers, and I say, how many of you have mission-critical data in the cloud? About half of them raise their hand. So who do you think is right? You think so? Yeah, I don't think so. Right. So, because think of it this way. If you're a developer and you have an idea, and the passion has struck, right? And you're thinking, I gotta get this idea. Let's go. And I go to the IT department and I say, hey, I have an idea and I need some servers. How long is it gonna take them to build those servers for you? How long is it? Weeks, right. If you say I need a fault tolerant, and right now it's gonna be 1 gig, but it might eventually be a terabyte. And by the way, it might spike during the Christmas season. These guys are now looking at like $50,000 in hardware costs, and now how long is it going to take? Right? And by the time you actually put the hardware in place, where's your passion gone? It's on to whatever the next project, because you forgot about the idea probably at that point, right? But so now imagine you're like the vice president of marketing, and your buddy comes to you, your friend, your guru comes to you and says, I got an idea for an app. I can write it in Flash. And you know the IT department's going to take 3 weeks, but you've got a credit card with a discretionary fund, and you swipe that card. How long before they have a database up and running, fault tolerant, ready to rock and roll? How long? Minutes, right? Okay. So now, who do you think is right? Do you think you have mission-critical data on the cloud right now? I promise you do. Because your developers say they do. Right? And IT has no idea. Pretty soon, there's 500 users on that database, and the marketing department completely relies on it, and IT was never informed. And they're still pulling money out of their discretionary fund, right? Okay, so my point is, whether DBAs have valid concerns about the cloud. They talk about compliance and backup and restore and availability and one throat to choke and accountability, and all of the DBA's concerns I've heard about databases in the cloud are 100% valid. The problem is the vice president of marketing doesn't share them with me, and he's already purchased them. That's the problem. So I see the cloud as inevitable. And the vision of the cloud, anytime you commoditize something that is really expensive, it becomes compelling on the business side, regardless of how valid our IT concerns are. So it's time to gear up for it. As much as you guys look at SQL Azure and say, oh, I wish it had these 15 things, or this is a real product, it's irrelevant. Because apps are being built on SQL Azure, apps for very large companies, apps that their IT department doesn't know is out there. It's the new access. It's like, right. Okay, so that's my pitch about this and how important this is, and why it's good that you're here, even though some of you feel dirty about being here. So this is you. You are very good looking, and you are safely sailing on the waters of an on-premise SQL server. And you're comfortable on those waters. You know that it storms sometimes, but you know how to fix hard drives. You know how to deal with performance problems. You know how to back up and restore. You know these things really well. So anything that comes up, you're just whistling happy. You look through your spyglass, and up ahead you see the cloud. And you think this cloud is dark and scary, and it obstructs visibility. You don't have insight into your hardware anymore. You don't have insight into how your licensing is going to work, or how this thing's going to scale, or how it's going to be HIPAA compliant, right? And so, but you see that you're sailing inevitably into the cloud, so you consult your map. And on the map, you check blog posts and SQL Server Central and all these gurus, and these guys are really good at heightening your concerns about going into that dark cloud. And you see, there be dragons, and that dragon, look at that dragon when you're up close. That dragon is pretty freaking scary. Nobody wants to sail into that dragon. So you decide to take a look at that dragon for yourself by going into your spyglass again. And as you peer through it, you realize that that dragon isn't actually as scary as it's said on the map. And actually, there's not just one dragon, there's 5 of them. And if you can get a handle on these 5 dragons, you will be well on your way to writing applications in the cloud, particularly for SQL Azure. And on SQL Azure, those 5 dragons are the connection string, some new error messages, some different tooling that you're not used to, and data migration and performance. Okay, so before we talk about those dragons, I want to cover just 2 quick things. And then we're going to go dragon after dragon after dragon, and we're going to slay those dragons. And at the end of it, you're going to feel comfortable with writing applications on this platform. Let me give you my motivation here. So I have been reading about SQL Azure and watching videos and dealing with the product group. I'm a SQL Azure MVP, and I'm one of their insiders, so I kind of steer the product from outside of Microsoft. And one of my concerns has been that if I'm brand new to SQL Azure, there's no place that's comprehensive that tells me what I have to do to get up and running on this thing. I mean, you get bits and pieces from this blog post and that blog post, but there's really no one place that says, what do I have to be worried about and where do I go from here? This presentation addresses that. It's very fast. I apologize for the speed, but I want to get the issues out and resolved as quick as possible, and I want to get you comfortable with the platform as quick as possible so that you can download the slide deck and feel like you're ready to rock and roll. Does that all make sense? Okay. By the way, I'm writing a book for O'Reilly called Learning SQL Azure. It'll be out in the springtime. So that's my goal for that book, is to write a book that's comprehensive, that just is, read this book and you're ready to rock and roll and write on the platform. So first off, you have to sign up for SQL Azure. Remember that vice president of marketing that we talked about earlier who swipes his credit card and is ready to rock and roll? I've timed it. From the time you go onto Azure.com to the time you have a SQL database ready to store data, if you've never been there before and you need to enter in all that stuff, it's no more, even if you're a very slow typist, no more than 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, that database is ready for you. If you've been there before and you've signed up before and you put your credit card before and you just want to create a brand new database for a new application, it's a second or 2. There's no reason to pay for SQL Azure if you want to try it out. Microsoft gives this thing away for 30 days, left, right, and center, and they give it away permanently if you have an MSDN subscription. How many of you have MSDN subscriptions? You all get it for free to play with. How many of you are BizSpark members? 1. Wow, that's really sad. You guys know that if you sign up for BizSpark, you basically get your MSDN subscription for free. You just have to sign up when you're approved. So I would research doing that. Start a little business. And you don't even have to incorporate. Just start a little business to play around with it, go into BizSpark and get all that stuff for free. If you go to any Microsoft event, you'll get a card. Oh, you know what? I'm not using the mic. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. The mic is constraining. If you, although they're recording me, so I can lose on that. If you go to a Microsoft event, they give out these free passes, 30-day passes. They'll stack them up on you. So my point is, if you want to try this, don't pay for it. Just go out and figure out a way to get it for free. The architecture for SQL Azure is a little bit different. You know, when you're on-premise SQL Server, and you say, yeah, I manage an on-premise SQL Server, right? You can actually point to something. You can say, there's my server sitting under that desk. I hope not, but, you know, sitting there, plugged in, air-conditioned, fault-tolerant, that's my server. And when you say, connect to this server, it's that box right there. When you connect to SQL Azure, it's not that simple. In SQL Azure, there's this notion of a logical SQL server and a physical hardware machine. And so the logical server is just that. It's not one physical box. It's at least, at minimum, 3 physical boxes, but it might be more. So follow with me on this slide. Up here, you have your logical server. As you hit the database, like let's pretend that you're hitting this blue database right here, you're going to go through the SQL Azure Gateway service. That service is going to find the physical machine that's hosting your database. Now you'll notice that this database has 3 copies. There's a blue copy. This blue database is here. The blue database is here on machine 5. You can't see that because the resolution's kind of bad, but machine 5. And the blue database right here is on machine 6. That's because when you create a database in SQL Azure, you get a primary replica and 2 secondary replicas of your database automatically. You can't configure that. You can't turn it on or turn it off. It happens automatically. Why do you think that's there? That's the only reason why it's there. If machine 4 goes down, machine 5 takes over and as the new primary, and another secondary spins up someplace else. Okay, that's pretty cool. That happens in the couple of minutes that you set, I want a new SQL Azure database. 3 copies of your database get created and it's fully fault tolerant. Now, if you had to set up a cluster to do that, how long would that take you? Okay, so at minimum, you create a blue database, you get 3 machines spinning up a copy of that database. Now look at this purple database. Machine 4 has the purple database. Oh, where's the purple database here? It's not there, right? Oh, it's here on machine 6. Guess what? It's probably on machine 7. And SQL Azure does that on purpose. They make sure that your databases are not fault tolerant over the exact same physical machines. So if you have 2 databases, you could have 4 servers or 5 or maybe even 6 servers involved in those 2 databases. So you have 3 and all of a sudden 9 servers potentially could be in play. That's pretty cool, right? Okay. This slide, by the way, came from an awesome article written by Kaylin Delaney, who's sitting in the back row. She wrote an article called Inside SQL Azure, and she wrote it last fall. And I loved it. I read it many times. So if you want to learn more about the architecture behind there and what the gateway service does and how load balancing works and things like that, you can check out her article and she'll explain it. So with the architecture done, let's talk about those dragons that we're slaying. Remember, our goal is we want to write an application, put it on SQL Azure, and know that we've covered our bases, that the major concerns that most people are going to have are covered. The first base that we're going to cover is the connection string. In SQL Azure, the connection string is just a little bit different, and here's why. Remember that we have 3 copies of our database in SQL Azure, and we're going to go through that gateway service. That gateway service doesn't act like a normal on-premise SQL server. So when we change our connection string, we're pointing it to the logical server, not a physical server. Now, how is that different? I'll show you in the next slide, but first let's talk about the connection string. Remember that every single application has a connection string, right? And that connection string has 5 different pieces of information. What are those 5 things? Server name, that's 1. Database name or catalog, right? That's 2. Username, that's 3. Password, right? That's 4. And well, that could or could not, but there's a 5th one. If you just said, bam! Yeah, nobody gets that one, but it's the provider, right? Are we using Avenger.net or whatever the provider is? Are we using the SQL data provider or Oracle or whatever, right? Right. That's the 5 things. So those 5 things in SQL Azure are the same, but there's a little bit of a nuance here. The first is, take a look at the data source in the connection string right up here. You see the first bolded line at the top, where it says some funky name .database.windows.net. That's a SQL Azure database. Anytime you see windows.net, you're on SQL Azure. So it needs to be a fully qualified domain name. The second is, remember that SQL Azure is multi-tenant, right? And so when you use your user ID, you're going to say the username that you're going to use to connect, and you're going to use @server name. So this first part, ETN, EJN, whatever, it's going to be Ike @ETN, EJN, whatever, as the username, which is a little bit different than the usernames you're used to on on-premise SQL Server, right? But you've got to remember to do that so that SQL Azure knows what account we're connecting to it, right? The next thing that we talked about, which is what Rob just mentioned, SQL Azure wants multiple active result sets, or MARs, set to true, and they want encrypt equal to true, so that all of SQL Azure's connections are encrypted. And the reason why we're doing that is because, well, okay, first of all, it's not necessarily required that you do encrypt equals true. It will negotiate that connection, but if you leave it off and you allow it to be negotiated, you're putting yourself subject to a man-in-the-middle attack. So you're better off just encrypting true right at the very beginning. Okay. A few more things about connection providers. You can use ADO.NET, ODBC, but PHP, you cannot use OADB. So remember that. No OADB. That's going to jam up some of you. You cannot use the use database command in any of your code. So when you use a use command right now, what are you doing? you're switching database context, right? You were in one database and you decided to move over to a different database, right? Why do you think the use database command wouldn't work in SQL Azure? Because they're on different machines, right? Because you go through the gateway service and you say what database you want, you get connected to the primary replica of that database. If you use a use database statement, there's no way to get you back to the gateway service without relogging in, which is exactly what you have to do in SQL Azure if you want to switch databases. So be aware of that. And in your applications, that's going to hang up some of you. You know, it's kind of been a knock on SQL Azure that we can't do fully qualified references and stored procedures if we want to pull data from a different database. And that's true, but you do need to open another connection to that database if you're going to interact with two different databases. You can use familiar tools to manage it, and I'll show you that in a little bit, like SQL CMD and SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio. You're going to use connection pooling. And if you're going to use SQL Server Management Studio, make sure that you use the 2008 R2 version of it. The 2008 version will actually work, but it's not supported. So you're going to have to download that or grab that if you're not on R2 already. And the other SQL Server services will work on-premise. Like you can use SQL Server reporting services on-premise, integration services, and analysis services on-premise. They can connect to a SQL Azure database, and it works as long as you don't use OLADB. So remember that with SSIS. Don't use your OLADB providers. You're going to be using your ADA providers, right? Okay. This code is very, very basic code up here. And how many of you are C# developers? Okay, so for you C# developers, if you're going to go hit a database, pull a bunch of data back and come out, and you're going to do it in ADO.NET, what objects are you going to be using? Okay, you see it up there. You see the connection one, right? SQL command, right? And the third? Data reader, right? And you might be throwing that data into a data set or a data table, right? You're going to use it, but yeah. Those are the main objects that you're going to be using in order to pull data back. And you know what you're going to do. You're going to instantiate a connection. You're going to open that connection up. You're going to instantiate a command. You're going to populate it with some, whatever the command text or stored procedure text is, right? You're going to populate a data reader. You're going to execute the command, hydrate the reader, and loop through the reader, right? Usually that's what you do. And then you're going to put that data someplace in variables or a data table or wherever you're going to put it, right? Okay. So that works on SQL Azure, but you got to be prepared for SQL Azure to pull the rug out from under you for a variety of reasons. And I'm going to talk about how that rug gets pulled out from under you in just a little bit. But basically, that fault tolerance that's built in there is there for a reason. So if you have a primary replica and a secondary replica, and the primary goes down, remember that you have to go through the gateway service to get to your secondary. Your connection's going to take a beating, right? And when that connection takes a beating, you're going to want to do what? Retry. You're going to want to show that error to the user? You think the user cares that the primary went down? No, they don't care at all, right? So you're going to retry. Now, every single time you have code that instantiates a connection, are you going to want to put your retry logic every single time? That retry logic is going to get arduous, isn't it? So yeah, you're going to want to avoid that. And the way you're going to avoid that is by using a SQL context object. And the SQL context is actually really cool. It's actually this function, called get SQL context info. It doesn't come out of the box anywhere. It was written in a blog post by that handsome guy right there. So Bart wrote this blog post. Let's go ahead and open it. And he said, if you're worried about connection retry, rather than putting all of your retry logic every time you use a connection, if instead you just had to use 2 lines of code, isn't that more compelling? Okay, well, if you want to use 2 lines of code, add those 2 lines, and then add this really long function down here. And we could go step by step through this function, but it's not necessary. I can tell you what it does. It uses this incrementing counter for retry logic. So it basically says, if the connection drops on me, try in a couple milliseconds. And then if that doesn't work, just increment it. Try in 0.5 seconds, try in a second, try all the way up to 10 seconds or 30 seconds, or whatever you set it at. But you just add that to your library, add those 2 statements into all of your code, and you're good to go, and SQL Azure can now fail over or get throttled or do whatever it's going to do, and it's not going to hardcore affect your users, and you're not going to get funky errors back to your users, and it'll kind of gracefully handle that situation. Okay, isn't he handsome? I pulled that off his blog. So that was Dragon 1. We slayed Dragon 1, that's the connection. Dragon 2 is kind of a tough dragon, which is why I put it up at the front. It's throttling, disaster recovery, and some new errors. So if you're used to on-premise SQL Server, a lot of this is going to be new information for you. The first is, you will get throttled. I promise you, you will not account for SQL Azure throttling you in your app. And when it throttles you, it stops accepting new commands of whatever statement it's angry about. So if it gets upset over reads, it stops reads. If it gets upset over updates, it stops updates. And it stops it for up to 10 seconds. So you're going to get 10-second intervals where it's just not going to allow you to mess with the database because it says that you were misbehaving. And the reason why it's doing that is because remember that SQL Azure is multi-tenant. We've got other people using the system, and we can't have you just choke CPU for everybody else, right? So that's when throttling is going to kind of beat you up a little bit. So here's a throttling scenario. Customer A uses 30% of the CPU on the server. Customer B comes in second and starts using 70% of the CPU on the server. Who triggered the throttling event? B. Who gets throttled? B. Does that sound fair to you? I think that's a fair way of doing it if we're going to do throttling, right? Number 2, customer B is now using 70%, minding his own business. And if he stays at 70%, customer B will never get throttled. A problem happens when customer A comes in second and starts using 30% of the CPU. Who triggered that event? A did, but B gets throttled. So even though that doesn't seem fair, and that's why throttling seems intermittent, and that's what people complain about is, man, I do that at midnight and nothing happens. I do it at noon and all of a sudden I'm being throttled on left, right, and center, right? It's because somebody else was coming in after you and making you trigger that, right? Okay, so be aware of that. You can also decode your throttling errors so that you know why. And basically, when you're trying to figure out why, you're basically looking at, was it CPU that made me get throttled? Was it the fact that I used too much of my database size? Did I use too much log I/O? And then once they throttled me, what did they decide to do about it? Did they decide, well, we were going to throttle you, but we flagged the error, but then didn't do anything about it? We started rejecting updates or rejecting writes or rejecting everything. And then you'll find out, oh, that I got hard throttled because I started using CPU too much. In the end, you're going to want to know about your CPU throttling instances, and you probably already know what is causing it. Like, you know the store procedure that made you throttle the CPU, right? Everyone can point to it and say, I put the one that, probably it's the one that's always going to recompile, right? That's the one that's going to trigger the CPU event. And you know that when you put recompile on it, you were kind of being lazy, right? You know that you should have rethought that when you first had the problem, right? So just be aware that SQL Azure is going to punish you for the bad practices you probably already knew you were doing, and you need to do something about it. Another reason why we need retry code is for disaster recovery. I've seen SQL Azure update servers out from under me already. They run service packs. They updated SQL Azure to the Denali engine. And that happened without anybody really complaining. So that's one cool thing about the cloud is that the underlying system can get updated without you. When you guys upgrade to Denali, is that going to happen without you knowing about it? No, right? It's probably on your project board for like a 3-month gig, right? Right. But everybody on SQL Azure got updated, and nobody cried. Well, maybe somebody did, but I didn't see the blog post. Also remember that we're going to have some new errors. Now, I'm not going to read this wall of text for you. I just put the wall of text in so when you download the slides, you're aware of the new errors. But basically, it's multi-tenant. So you're going to get errors if you open a transaction for more than 24 hours. SQL Azure will disconnect you. SQL Azure will drop you if you have a connection that's been idle for 30 minutes. It will drop you if you use more than 1 million logs. And unless you're DBCC CheckDB, I don't even know how you would do that. But anyway, good luck with that. If you have a transaction that uses more than 1 million logs, I would like to see it. And a couple other things that I'm not going to go through, but be aware that if you are kind of a hog, you're going to get an error. And these are the error numbers. Dragon number 3 is some new tooling. And actually, the old tooling doesn't work quite the same way that you're used to. Okay, so we slayed Dragon 1, which was the connection string. We slayed Dragon 2, which was throttling and some new errors. Right? And now we're on to Dragon 3, and what we're looking for is this tooling that's a little bit uncomfortable. And here's why. So if I go to SQL Azure, let's go SQL.azure.com. I just downloaded Chrome because IE was erroring out. Oh, is this recorded? Yeah, but it's going to go online when you hear it. Okay, so this is the regular Windows Azure management tool. And anybody who writes anything on the Azure platform sees this tool. SQL Azure starts when you click database. And when you click database, and I've got some bad resolution here, so I apologize. Actually, it's kind of a funky resolution. Let's just see if I can get down there. Wow, that's not good. I've never seen that before. So, you know what's happening here is it is, I can't get to the Silverlight management tool. But that's okay. Let me show you what I wanted to show you. If I can. Hang on. I'm going to do some voodoo here to get my resolution back. It's the projector that's kind of posing me, the 640 by 480 projector. Can I really? Oh, it did? Okay, let's try doing that. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So, we went down to 800 and 600 now. Okay, so where can you go to? All right, there we go. Okay. So I click database, and then on the left side, I see my database name. Remember that funky name I showed you earlier? Everybody's going to get a funky name. And then remember that fully qualified domain name is right here, this o1x.windows.net. That's SQL Azure. So what I can do is I can take that name, and I can copy it, and I could go into SQL Server Management Studio and see it connect right there. And just to kind of show you, actually, let's reconnect. So I'm going to disconnect. Okay. And then connect Database Engine. You guys do this all the time, right? And you guys look at, see the login, ls-ike at, and then the server name. And then I type in my super secret password, which is Bob Sullivan's my hero. And then there we go. Okay. So already you see an on-premise SQL Server on the top, and you see SQL Azure on the bottom. You notice the differences already? Just looking at the tool, you know SQL Azure is different. No replication, right? So, okay. If I open up databases, I can see one of my databases, like the SQL Flashcards database, and I open up tables. This is feeling comfortable, isn't it? Like you're on SQL Azure, but you feel like you're on an on-premise SQL Server. If I right-click on tables and click New Table, what's going to come up? Right. No, I tricked you. Okay, so we don't have the designers in SSMS. So as we're creating tables, we've got to be really comfortable with Transact SQL. Because that's what we're going to be using with SQL Azure. Which might not be comfortable for everybody. Hopefully it's comfortable for anybody who calls themselves a DBA. Okay. But what happens if you're a beginner? I mean, that's kind of daunting to have to learn Transact SQL just to create a few tables and put some data in it if you're a beginner. So what we can do is I can go back to Chrome. And by the way, I'm doing Chrome on purpose because notice, bam, okay, that's an Apple product. I kind of hid the Apple product because I was getting made fun of too much. But so I like SQL Azure because it brings SQL Server into the world of like Java developers and PHP developers and Rails developers and guys who are typically SQL users can now begin to use it with not the same barrier to entry that they had before. So if I click on Manage, a new tool pops up. And I actually really like this tool. It's not where it should be, and it's not where it will be next year at this time, but they're on their way to having a pretty good tool. How do you know, what platform do you think this tool was written in? Yeah. 2 ways you know it's a simple app. 1, it does that, and 2, there's probably some 3D cube in it someplace that does funky things. Seems like every Silverlight app has some 3D thing that they're showing. Okay, I log in. You know what? I want to actually go to the SQL flashcards database anyway. So manage. This is a little bit on the slow side for tooling this tool. I don't know why this tool, I haven't really seen it go this slow because it's not actually that big of a tool. So I'm not sure. Are you guys watching Netflix videos on this laptop? All right, everybody get off BitTorrent. Okay. Connect. And then we get this kind of graphical tool that's outside of SSMS that will kind of look familiar to you. Come on. Anytime. So I promise you, I tested this demo 10 minutes before you guys showed up. I'm not being throttled. We said that. Yeah, awesome.
I think they make the new product in HTML5.
Nothing that I've seen is in HTML5. It's still in Silverlight. I've seen, there's a new version of this tool that I've seen. It's still in Silverlight. Okay. So the tool is down and we're ready to rock and roll. So look at this. You guys have like a new table. And this looks a little bit more comfortable. I know it's kind of washed out, but I can add a column, right? You get a little bit of a designer here, right? And I can open up a table, an existing table that I already have, like the flashcards table. And I can say, okay, put me in design mode. And it shows me my existing columns. And if I say put me in data mode, it shows me the data that's in that table. So the ribbon. That's how you know, right? So there's a ribbon up at the top, and it looks kind of like Access, doesn't it? Remember I told you this is kind of the new Access? Well, you can see how easy it would be to like create tables, start throwing data in tables, and be ready to go. Okay, so you can use SSMS, but be aware there's some differences. You can use the Database Manager tool. Oh, one of the cool things about the Database Management tool is you don't have to install anything. So if I have to go into SQL Azure and play around with it, browser, hit SQL.azure.com, manage, just like we saw me do here. You can do it from anywhere and start managing your database and progressing. Dragon number 4 is the database migration. So imagine that you're migrating an existing brownfield application over to SQL Azure. You got to get what? You got to get schema up into SQL Azure, and you got to get data up there, right? So schema you can script out, and scripting is kind of cool because in SQL Server Management Studio, it knows that SQL Azure is the target. So when you go to generate scripts, you can say I'm targeting this for SQL Azure because there's some keywords in SQL Azure that are not compatible. What's one of them? We learned it already. Use, right. So it strips out any use statements you might have. And second, when you go to create a table on an on-premise SQL Server in the script right now, what's the last line of every create table statement? It does it by default. I don't know why. Right. Well, in SQL Azure, this system is obscured from you. So there's no such thing as on primary. So if you're going to script out the tables, it removes all that stuff that's not compatible. Microsoft open sourced a tool called the SQL Azure Migration Wizard. And it basically creates the scripts for schema, and it creates the BCP commands for data for you automatically. And it uses regular expressions to look in your object definitions and look for those statements that are not compatible, and it scripts those out for you. So it's just kind of a cool tool. I was going to demo, but time is eking away, and I know you guys want to join. Okay. Dragon number 5 is performance tuning. And this is kind of a big one. So let's get this right out of the way because these are common complaints with SQL Azure. There is no profiling. There is no PSS data. Some of our DMVs are missing. There's no best practices analyzer. There's no extended events right now. You can't network capture. So you're thinking, wait a minute, I've been doing on-premise diagnostics for what, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? I mean, at that very first slide when I said you were safely sailing on the seas of an on-premise SQL server, how long have you been sailing those seas? I saw people raise their hands that they were been using it since prior to SQL 7.0, which means you were using this in the mid-90s. You might be going on 12, 15, 17 years. Kaylin, how long have you been using SQL?
24 years.
As of?
Yesterday.
Yesterday, 24 years, okay. And SQL Azure is brand new, and when I say all these tools are taken away from you, it's like I've ripped out your family members. You've known some of these tools longer than you know your own children, right? Okay. But when you think about it, some of these tools should be taken away from you. Not all of them. All of them, some of them are important, but the reason why the file system is being obscured from you is because they've commoditized it. They don't want you playing with the file system. They don't want you running best practices analyzer to find out where the files are and whether or not the log has enough space and things like that. So that's what you don't have. I can tell you that the SQL team is aware of the profiling problem, which tends to be your lifeblood. And it shouldn't be. You need to kind of think about extended events and using extended events to do debugging and server tracing. You need to be thinking about tracing. So, and I promise you the SQL Azure team is thinking about the same thing. So that is coming. What's that? It did. And I just said the Azure team has heard you. So yeah, they've hinted at TechEd that that might be coming. Okay. So what are we going to do if we have performance problems in SQL Azure? Chances are your main performance problem is going to be throttling. So think about what's going to trigger those throttling events and do something about it. You have missing indexes, and you know you can create better indexes. So indexing is going to be our main performance thing that we're going to use. We're going to make sure our indexes are covering. We're going to make sure that we're sorting appropriately. We're going to make sure that we're paging. So of you that are developers, how many of you are paging data coming out right now? 2 of you are paging. Okay. How many of you are paging every time you should be paging? Okay, when DBAs think paging, they think either memory paging or they think the pages in the MDF file. But when developers think paging, what are we talking about? Right, so developers use paging only one way, and that is like Google uses it. When Google says, I found 3 million records in 0.05 seconds, and then they say, here's the first 20, that's paging. And why do you think Google's doing that? Performance, right? They're using their pipes effectively, right? And chances are, nobody looks past row 20 anyway. So how many of your apps should be using paging, but they're not? Probably a lot of them, right? Okay. Paging does a lot of things. The first thing is SQL Azure charges you for bandwidth going out of the data center. So if you've got an on-premise application hitting SQL Azure as the data store, you're going to get charged every time those records come down for no reason. The second thing is, what do you think the latency is going to be between a SQL Azure data center and you? Anybody guess? It's the same with Amazon, it's the same with Google App Engine, it's the same with App Harbor. What's the latency? Yeah, milliseconds. What did you say? A few hundred is probably a good guess. At least 100, right? And then probably averaging to 150, right? How is that different than the latency on an on-premise SQL server? 20, 10, 20, right? There's a big difference there, right? So you weren't paging because you weren't getting punished for it. But this time, you will get punished for it. So make sure you're doing best practices like that. Limit the columns. No more select star. I know you DBAs don't do it, but Go back to your developers. No more select time. They need to have just the columns that they're actually going to use in the grid. Use connection pooling. Do the retry logic that we talked about. And cache where you can, particularly if it's an on-premise application. Caching's gotten a lot easier than it was 10 years ago. There's no reason to not implement caching in an application. It's just laziness at this point. Here's some things that I didn't cover yet. There's a few things that I want to cover, but they will be included in the book that I mentioned, that I'm writing. The first thing is pricing. SQL Azure is $10 a gig per month, and it's charged on a day rate. And it's charged by the amount of data you actually use. So when you go create a database in SQL Azure, and we can actually do that because I can use the database tool right now. So let's go back to Chrome. And I'll go back to my management tab. And I'll open up my database, and I'll just say, create database right here. And the database name, I'll say SQL in the city. You have a choice between editions, either web or business. Right now, like if you do web, you're allowed a 1 gig or 5 gig database. And if you do business, you're allowed 10 to 50 gig. Although if you were paying attention at PASS, what did they announce at PASS? Yeah, it's going up to 150. Okay. That's the only difference between the web and the business edition right now. It's the max size of the database. The reason why I show you this is I'm going to create a 50 gig database right now, and I just told you it's $10 a gig. So how much am I going to be charged per month if I click OK right now? 500, right? No. What I've just specified is my max database size, but I'm being billed for the data I'm using, not the data I've capped at. So right now, I'm probably not being charged anything to have an empty database there. But the minute I start throwing data in it, if it's less than a gig, I'm getting charged $10 a month. So why specify the max database size? It's because you're capping your billing. You're saying, I don't want to be charged any more than $10 a month or $50 a month or whatever it's going to be, right? Okay. Here's the next thing. If you hit your max size, your database will be up for reads, but will stop accepting updates and writes until you start deleting records. Remember that there's a lag between the time you say a record is deleted and the time SQL Azure reclaims that space. So if you have a 10 gig max, you hit the max, you get cut off, you delete records so that you go back down so you don't get charged more, you're going to be waiting like 10 minutes before they're open up again. Maybe not 10. I mean, results vary. Who knows how long? But you're going to be waiting some amount of time before you're back and running for updates. Or you can just go into the tool and say, okay, make a 50 gig max, and you're going to be up and running pretty quickly. I think immediately. Included and excluded features. These change at every service release. Like right now, we don't have SQL Server reporting services in the cloud. But in December, we will. Of course, they say, you know, if you paid attention to SQL Pass, they said by the end of the year. I don't know if that's true. They said by the end of the year last year, too. They had some hiccups. But we know that it's coming. They demoed it and showed it to us. You have a question?
Just talk about the bandwidth charge change.
I didn't hear that question.
The bandwidth charge for data transfer.
Yeah, the bandwidth charge for data transfer is like 10 to 15 cents a gig, depending on if it's ingress or egress. And it also depends on the data center. I consider that nominal. So like I've been using SQL Azure for a long time, and my bill is always the space used. And I've transferred gigs back and forth and been charged like $5 at the most. Right? So it doesn't seem to be a big deal. So far. I'll let you know if that changes.
Given that they're already throttling, it seems reasonable to assume that they're going to offer stratified performance in things like that business class versus a web class under other choices.
That seems reasonable, and I'm under NDA. Anything else? Okay. So, here's the next thing that I'll say. I just said that seems reasonable, and I'm under NDA. I also said we don't have reporting services yet, but we will, right? SQL Azure's on a quarterly release cycle, which means if you saw a feature that you wanted and it doesn't have it now, you just have to check back. So I hear a lot of people, and I see blog posts, in the cloud, you have to pay attention to the date of a blog post, because if you say, one of the main blog posts that's still up on top on the SEO is SQL Azure doesn't have database triggers, a problem they solved 14 months ago. But yeah, I hear that all the time. There's no triggers. Well, no, that was solved. We know that was fixed. So just be aware, things change in the cloud very, very quickly, much faster than they did in on-premise. Actually, let me talk about that for a second, because this bears repeating. Am I done, by the way? Am I out of time? Okay. The cloud is a scary place because your DBA job is changing out from under you. And where you used to spend a lot of time monitoring backups and taking a look at failed hard disks and worried about IOPS and things like that, that's now out of your control, and you're thinking, wow, that was a major part of my job. But fundamentally, that part of your job didn't add any business value. Right? The business doesn't care how many IOPS the SAN has. The business just cares that the data comes back. And however the data comes back, it's magic to them. It's magic if you do it. It's magic if Amazon or Microsoft does it. Right? So you're going to have some free time. What are you going to do with that free time? You're going to spend your time doing things that do add business value. You're going to realize that the cloud's on a quarterly release cycle and you're going to have to keep up with it. Have you looked at the Amazon menu of services on the Amazon cloud? Yeah. Or like Amazon RDS? Have you looked at that? Yeah, I liken it to the train board at Paddington Station. You're looking at the board, you're like, I don't know where I want to go. How do I find out what train takes me there? It's just daunting, right? Right, yeah, they're cannibalizing themselves in some cases too, right? So you feel like, man, I'm going to have to spend 3 days to learn what Amazon's offering me here. Well, guess what? You're going to have a little more free time. So you can spend the 3 days figuring out what Amazon is offering. And you realize that Azure's on a quarterly release cycle, so every quarter you're going to have to go back and figure out, is this service something good for my business or not? And it's not every 3 years anymore. And that store procedure that's making you get throttled, you're going to have to rewrite that. I know you've been delaying it for about 4 years, but now's the time to go back in there and roll up your sleeves and figure out what happened. Right? I know it's 14 pages long, but you're going to have to do it again. Here's some good resources if you want to learn more about SQL Azure. And look, Caleb, you're the second bullet. So that's the Inside SQL Azure article I mentioned earlier. Because SQL Azure changes so frequently, they don't print materials like normal. They use a wiki page, and they use their blog, and they use Twitter. They use the heck out of Twitter. In fact, I find out things released just like you do, through Twitter. And they say, we just released this. Oh, all right, let's go look. If you want to learn about SQL Azure Entity Framework, Julie Lerman wrote a good blog post on it. You can look at my site. My blog's on there. You can follow me on Twitter at ike_ls. .NET Rocks had an episode on SQL Azure Migration Wizard 2 years ago. That was really well done. 2 other SQL Azure MVPs, Scott Klein and Hervé Reguero, wrote a book called Professional SQL Azure. And that was written a couple years ago, and it's actually kind of outdated. I mean, Hervé's my friend, and I love him a lot, but they're not updating that book. My book's coming out. My O'Reilly book is coming out, so you can pay attention to that and buy it. I love it. I can not only be a published author, I can do what Kaylin told me today. Kaylin said it's not enough to be an author. You have to be an author of a book people buy. So we'll see. We'll see if that happens. There are some Redgate tools for SQL Azure. You guys might have seen SQL Compare and Data Compare for schema comparison and data comparison. Well, you know SQL Azure doesn't support the whole library of T-SQL code. So you can use those tools to get your apps up in the cloud easily. SQL Azure Backup. Okay, the backup story for SQL Azure is not the greatest. It's a little hacky. What happens in SQL Azure right now is a full backup. So it's called a database copy. And the way a database copy works is like this. It's a create database command. I wish I actually had this command in on-premise SQL servers, because I think this command is cool. And the way it looks is create database tech502 as copy of, and then server name dot database. And now what you're doing is you're creating a full copy of that, an asynchronous, you don't get blocked. Full copy of that database someplace else. And you have to remember to do that, or you have to script it somehow and make sure you get that full copy. If anything happens to your original database, like somebody deletes all your customers, that never happens to you guys, right? You're doing a full restore back over, which isn't the greatest. You want to do a point-in-time restore, but there's no point-in-time restore. if you want to know the status of that database copy, it's select star from sys.dm_database copies, and it will tell you where it is in the copy process. It's not instant. Depending on how large the database is, it's going to take some time to make a copy. Now here's the problem. You notice that the syntax, that's a SQL Azure server name up there, which means if you wanted to make a copy of your database and you wanted to drag it down on premise, you can't do that, which really stinks if somebody deletes your server. And I've seen that on the user groups happen. So somebody deletes your server, guess what? Your full database is down and all your copies are down. And now you're like calling SQL Azure, begging them to restore. They do backups and they will restore, but you better be a sweet hacker. So Redgate wrote a tool for this. Oh, but before I talk about that, there's hope for the future. I pulled this right off of the TechEd demo. Do you see that restore button up there? That doesn't exist in Database Manager today, but it will. And when you click on it, it just says, from what time? It's a full point-in-time restore. And so obviously they've written it, they're obviously testing it. It's in CTP right now, you can try to sign up for it. It's a private CTP, which they're using for value customers. And then they'll release it, and you can get that, kind of cool. In the meantime, that Redgate SQL Azure Restore also doesn't have a point in time, but at least it will allow you to grab your database and pull it down locally, and it will allow you to restore your database and push it back up to SQL Azure. So there's my pitch for the Redgate tools. If you want to talk to me, I'll answer the phone. For the first few times. And you can direct message me on Twitter, you can email me. I'm also a Developmentor instructor. Who's heard of Developmentor? Not too popular in the SQL community, but developers love Developmentor. We're kind of the top tier training company. But I teach Developmentor courses. I'm a private consultant and an MVP. I've also created a really cool user group that I want to pitch right now. And actually, there's some members of my user group in the room. It's called the San Diego Tech Immersion Group. And here's what I figured out. I would go to these user group meetings and I'd see these experts sit on the stage, and I'd watch the audience hang in for the first half hour, and then they would get lost. Like Kathleen Dollard would talk about meth, and they'd hang in for the first 15 minutes, and then when she deep dived into it, more than half the room would not know what she was talking about. So my thought was this. My thought was, man, I have to learn Entity Framework, Link. I have to learn HTML5, Silverlight. I have to learn Denali. I have to learn all this stuff, right? You guys feel like you have a lot to learn? Yeah, it's the amount of stuff that you need to learn is overwhelming, isn't it? So I created a user group that's different than all the other user groups. We pick one topic, and we stay with that one topic for like 6 months. And the publishers donate free copies, e-copies of their book to us. And so we have everybody in the group read the same book, about 150 pages a month. And then they come back to the group and they help each other answer questions on that topic. So when we talk about T-SQL, you can read a T-SQL book and you can say, CTEs, how is that different than derived tables? And then you go back to the group and some experts are there and they say, oh yeah, CTEs are great. We use CTEs all the time, they're great, yeah, you can use them. And it gives beginners real world context for how these new technologies are actually used. And then they get to the part where they're like, intersect and accept. And then the experts say, never using it. And they're like, oh, okay. So I know I can learn about it, but this guy's not using it, right? So it's okay for me to not use it. So that's what's cool about TIG. We stick with the topic, we read the books together, and we bring usually MVPs in the room to help beginners get through hard topics. And it's been insanely popular. I started it in August of 2010. It's the largest user group in Southern California right now. We actively get 80 members a month, and we'll pull in 150. So that nobody really gets those numbers anymore now that .NET is kind of mature. So there you go. Any questions? Yeah, let's hear it. Oh, I'll put it on my blog. Yep, so just check my website, you can check my blog, and I'll throw it there today. Yep. Yeah, nothing with the log is supported. So we've got another tool called SQL Azure Data Sync Services. So I could talk for SQL Azure for hours because I can talk about OData, which is awesome. I can talk about data sync, which does the same thing as log shipping. It's like merge replication, kind of. I could talk about SQL Azure reporting services. I could talk about federations. Oh my gosh, I could talk about federations all day. Sharding, like the NoSQL guys who shard all the time, we have that in CTP right now. And maybe one day you'll get it on premise if you create a SQL dog and sacrifice your dog. You might see that one day, but SQL Azure is going to get it first. So you don't think it'll ever get it?
No dog sacrifice.
Oh, no dog sacrifice. Okay. So yeah, we have a lot to talk about SQL Azure, and check in. I'm going to write some new presentations for next year and teach you about federations and things like that. Thanks a lot for your time, guys. Yeah. Oh, right now? Oh, no, I'm going to go. No, we need to turn jobs to no, it's. But you can mimic SQL Agent in there's a blog post on it. Yes. Right, so there's no performance SLA. There's no guarantee. Well, performance SLAs in the cloud are really tricky. Like, nobody's really doing a great SLA. They're doing availability SLAs. They're not doing performance SLAs. What they can do, and what they eventually will do, is a hardware guarantee for SQL. Is that what you're doing? They hinted at something. That's a tricky piece. Because in the multi-tenant system, a lot of our performance is under your control. And every app is so different. How do we know that your app wasn't screwed up? How does one, not we, I'm not.
No, I
99.9.
like posted it on like public health laws? No.
39 is very same.
Yes.
It's still kind of a wild west. I think we'll get there.
It does. But we dealt with the same thing before. We didn't see so many out of the people, right? It's like,
Yeah.
Why do you want to do that?
oh,
You understand how that's what it's through.
Right.
no, it was.
Everyone's on SQL Azure since
But what is that?
I mean,
Files were
I've
stored.
written
Files
files
were
to
very different, but normal files.
No one's complaining about SQL.
Yeah,
They're
right.
complaining about Flutter.
Yeah,
So
I
you're searching.
think
And mostly,
broaden
I'm
your
complaining about the idea
search
of
scope
Flutter.
and like.
They're complaining about Microsoft's handling of the problem. Like, sure, wow, but don't disconnect me for 10 seconds. Like, that's like a scorched earth type of throttling, right? You're done. Just eke me back a little bit,
Just
Be graceful about it.
Just keep.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, that's an interesting solution. There is a DMV you can write your own alert to. It's called sys_database usage, sys.d_database usage. And you can query that, and it's really good for billing because it tells you your day usage rates. So you can see how you're growing. It's actually kind of cool because you can pivot that data, and you can watch how your database is growing over time. It's kind of neat. You're charged this data rate by usage. So if you go up to 10 gigs and you delete half your data, you're going to be charged for the 10 gigs for that day. And then the next day you'll go back to 5 and be charged for that. So a couple dollars. You're not going to get the monthly charge.
Unfortunately, our business model is we're running digital closet, so the data size.
We are addicted to data, Phil, aren't we? We are addicted to data. somehow we think that sales data from 2002 is going to help us predict what sales are going to be in 2012. And